The bride entered her own wedding in red, but what she did next left everyone in silence. The music was still playing, and everyone expected to see her in white. But when the doors opened, no one understood what was happening because she wasn't in white, she was in red, and no one could imagine what she was about to say in front of everyone. If you like these stories, write "I like it" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe because what happened that day no one ever forgot. The Napa Valley sky was clear that afternoon. The sun shone down on the vineyard-covered hills. Grace Cathedral had never looked so beautiful, decorated with white and gold flowers in every corner. The 200 guests had already taken their seats. The most important people in the wine world had come to witness the wedding of Evelyn Sterling, heiress to the most famous wine empire in the valley, to Julien Dubois, the Frenchman who had been her rock after the death of her parents. The women flashed brilliant jewels, and the men in elegant suits talked business, while they waited for the bride. At the altar, Julien stood in his flawless black tuxedo. His perfectly coiffed hair shone as brightly as his smile. His green eyes scanned the guests with confidence. "I've never seen such a calm groom," one guest whispered to another. "That's because without him, Evelyn wouldn't have survived the tragedy," the other replied. "He brought her back to life." Thomas Bennett, the manager of Sterling Vineyards for over 20 years, clutched the ceremony program tightly. Beside him, Rachel Stein, the family's lawyer, maintained a serious expression that hid her concern. The orchestra began to play the wedding march. All the guests stood and turned towards the main door. The large wooden doors opened slowly, letting in a ray of light. And then when everyone could see who was entering, a total silence fell over the church. There was Evelyn Sterling, but not as everyone expected. She wasn't wearing the white gown that the magazines had announced. She wasn't wearing her mother's veil. She wasn't wearing the diamond tiara that would complete the perfect ensemble. Evelyn Sterling was walking into her own wedding dressed entirely in red, a deep, intense red like the best Cabernet from her cellars. A dress that showcased her figure with elegance, with a skirt that trailed behind her like a pool of blood on the white marble floor. Her brown hair fell freely over her shoulders. Her lips, painted the same red as her dress, were not smiling, and her dark eyes, fixed on the man at the altar, shone with determination. Gasps of surprise were heard. A champagne flute fell to the floor. An elderly woman quickly made the sign of the cross. At the altar, Julien's perfect smile vanished for a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His eyes showed a flicker of fear. It was only a moment before he recovered his mask of the perfect groom. But Thomas and Rachel noticed it and shared a look. Evelyn walked down the aisle. Each step echoed in the silence. Her heels marked a steady rhythm, as if counting down the minutes before something terrible happened. "What's going on?" someone whispered. "Maybe it's a new trend," another replied, searching for an explanation. But everyone felt the tension in the air. This wasn't an eccentricity. It was a declaration of war. Father William, confused, looked at Julien, and then at Evelyn. The groom extended his hand to her. "Evelyn, my love," he said, his voice trying to sound normal. "You look stunning." She didn't take his hand. She stopped a few feet away from him and smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It was a smile as cold as a knife. "Thank you, Julien," she replied, her voice clear for all to hear. "I thought red would be perfect for what we're about to celebrate today." A chill ran through the crowd. In that voice, in that look, there was no trace of the fragile woman everyone knew. This was an Evelyn no one had seen before. "Shall we begin?" Father William asked, trying to proceed with the ceremony. Evelyn shook her head. "Before we begin," she said, looking out at the guests, "there's something you all need to know about the man I'm about to marry." It was then that Julien Dubois understood that his castle of lies was about to crumble. What terrible truth had Evelyn discovered to dare to do this? What could be so grave that a woman would turn her own wedding into an act of public justice? The answer was in her eyes, in the stiffness of her back, in the controlled tremor of her hands. Something had changed in her. Something had died, and something new, powerful, and dangerous had been born in its place. 2 years earlier, the Vineyard Crest Hotel glittered with hundreds of lights. The annual Napa Vintners Gala brought together the biggest names in the business for a night of celebration. Elegant gowns and expensive suits filled the ballroom as everyone sipped the finest wines. In the center, a stage decorated with flowers awaited the most important moment, the presentation of the Excellence Award, the industry's highest honor. Robert Sterling, a man of 60 with skin weathered by the sun, nervously adjusted his tie. Beside him, Eleanor, his wife of a lifetime, smiled at him with pride. "Stop fidgeting," Eleanor told him, fixing his shirt. "You look like a nervous boy. "I'd rather be among my vines than among all these fancy people," he replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "These people are here to celebrate what we built with these hands," she answered, taking his rough hands in hers. 30 years of hard work deserve recognition. Nearby, Evelyn Sterling, at 34, chatted with a group of young winemakers. She was the perfect heiress, intelligent, prepared with studies in France, and a deep knowledge of the business. Her turquoise dress highlighted her figure, and her smile lit up every conversation. "Your father must be nervous," one of the young men commented. "Though we all know the award is his." "My father never takes anything for granted," Evelyn replied with pride. "He says that in wine, as in life, every last drop counts." What no one knew was that from a corner, a pair of green eyes was watching the Sterling family's every move. Julien Dubois, a glass in his hand, studied the scene like a hunter studying his prey. He wore a dark gray suit that accentuated his build. His perfectly styled hair and well-groomed beard gave him an air of European sophistication. "Do you know the Sterlings?" a man who approached him asked. "I know their reputation," Julien replied with a French accent. "And their wine. The 2015 Sterling Reserve is excellent. They're like Napa royalty," the man explained. "Started with nothing, and now they dominate the market. And the most impressive part is they did it without inheriting anything, just with hard work." Julien nodded, never taking his eyes off Evelyn. "And the daughter, she works in the business too?" he asked, with apparent casualness. "Evelyn is the future of Sterling Vineyards. She has an exceptional palate and knows every detail. Robert has been grooming her to take over when he retires." A small smile appeared on Julien's lips. "Interesting," he murmured. The lights dimmed and the award ceremony began. On the big screen, images of Sterling Vineyards appeared. "Tonight we celebrate the excellence of a family that transformed the wine industry in our valley," the announcer said, "for their exceptional work, for their quality and tradition, for turning a dream into an empire without losing their humility. This year's Excellence Award goes to Robert and Eleanor Sterling, founders of Sterling Vineyards." Everyone applauded. Robert and Eleanor embraced before going up on stage. Evelyn watched them with pride and love. On stage, Robert took the microphone after receiving the Crystal Award. "This award isn't for us," he said emotionally. "It's for everyone who believed in us when all we had was a piece of land and a dream. It's for the workers who tend our vines. It's for our daughter Evelyn, who will inherit not just our lands but our passion." Eleanor spoke next. "When we came to this valley, they told us it was impossible to compete with the big wineries," she recalled. "But Robert always said, 'Good wine, like the truth, always comes to light.' And today, 30 years later, we're here to say that dreams built with honesty and hard work sooner or later bear fruit." Everyone applauded as the couple descended the stage. Evelyn ran to hug them, and the cameras captured that perfect family moment. From his position, Julien Dubois did not applaud. He just watched, calculated, planned. His eyes narrowed as he saw the family scene. It wasn't envy he felt. It was something colder. It was pure ambition. As guests congratulated the Sterling family, Julien finished his glass in one gulp and moved through the crowd. With each step, he seemed to be making decisions, preparing a plan. When he got near the Sterlings, he stayed in the background, studying how they interacted, listening to conversations, memorizing names. He saw how Robert protected his family, how Eleanor was always close to her husband, and especially how Evelyn intelligently handled those who approached with business proposals. "The perfect family," he murmured to himself. A waiter passed by, offering champagne. Julien took a glass, raising it toward the Sterlings, in a private toast that no one else understood. "Cheers, Sterling family," he whispered. "Enjoy it while you can." The celebration continued. The Sterlings were the center of attention, receiving congratulations and proposals. No one noticed the Frenchman watching them. No one except Robert Sterling, who at one point caught Julien's fixed gaze and felt a chill. Their eyes met. Julien smiled and inclined his head in a sign of respect. Robert responded in kind, but something inside him, an instinct developed over years of business, warned him of danger. "Who is that man?" he asked a colleague discreetly. "I think he's Julien Dubois, a French consultant. Just arrived in Napa. They say he has important contacts in Europe." Robert nodded without saying more, but he kept an eye on that stranger for the rest of the night. What Robert Sterling couldn't know was that he had just met the man who in less than 2 years would not only enter his family and his company, but would cause his and his wife's death to take control of everything they had built. And that look was just the first step of a deadly plan that had just begun. A week after the gala, Evelyn was walking through the main winery of Sterling Vineyards, overseeing the new harvest. She wore dark jeans, work boots, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail revealed her makeup-free face focused on her work. "Thomas, how's the fermentation on the special batch?" she asked the manager walking with her. Thomas Bennett, his face marked by years of work in the sun and his hands calloused, looked at his tablet. "It's perfect, Evelyn. The temperature is stable, and the sugar levels are right where we want them. If we keep this up, this harvest could be even better than 2015's. Evelyn smiled, satisfied. The 2015 reserve had been the wine that made Sterling Vineyards internationally famous. Surpassing it would be a major achievement. "My father always says we don't compete against others but against ourselves," she said, touching one of the steel tanks. "Each harvest has to be better than the last." They were in the lab when Rachel Stein, the company's lawyer, entered quickly. "Evelyn, excuse me," she said, somewhat flustered. "A representative from United European Vintners just arrived. He says he has an appointment with your father, but Robert is at the North Vineyards and won't be back until this afternoon." Evelyn frowned. "I don't remember any appointment for today." "That's what I told him," Rachel replied, adjusting her glasses, "but he insists it's important. He doesn't want to speak with anyone but a Sterling." Thomas and Evelyn looked at each other. "United European Vintners?" Thomas asked suspiciously. "We've never worked with them. That's why it seems strange to me," Rachel confirmed. "I told him he could come back another day, but he mentioned an opportunity in France that can't wait." Evelyn thought for a moment. Exports to Europe were precisely what her father had tasked her with developing. "All right, I'll see him," she decided. "Thomas, can you finish the inspection? Rachel, where is he?" In the tasting room, the lawyer replied. "He's very persuasive." Evelyn walked towards the main building, a structure that blended traditional and modern architecture. The tasting room, with large windows showcasing the vineyards and a long wooden table, was one of the most beautiful places in the winery. Upon entering, she found a man looking at the landscape, tall, well-built in a blue suit that showed good taste. Hearing the door, he turned around. Evelyn was surprised to recognize him. It was the man she had seen, watching them at the gala. His green eyes seemed even more intense in the natural light. "Mr. Dubois, I presume," Evelyn said, extending her hand. "I'm Evelyn Sterling." Julian took her hand with a measured smile, neither too formal nor too familiar. "The daughter of Robert and Eleanor," he replied with his French accent. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Sterling, and please call me Julian." "My father isn't available right now," she explained directly. "I understand you had an appointment, though it's not on his schedule. I'm the director of international expansion. Perhaps I can help you." Julian showed a surprise that seemed completely genuine. "How strange," he said, looking at his phone. "I thought my assistant had confirmed the meeting. My apologies for the confusion." Evelyn nodded professionally. There was something about the man that was attractive but also unsettling. "No problem. How can I help you?" Julian put his phone away and looked at her intently. "I represent a group of European distributors interested in high-quality Californian wines," he explained. "The Sterlings are naturally our first choice, especially after the award you received." "That's flattering," Evelyn replied, motioning for them to sit, "though we are very selective with our international partners." "I know that perfectly well," he responded, with a perfect smile. "And it's precisely that exclusivity we're looking for. We don't want wines that can be found in any European supermarket. We're looking for gems like the ones you produce." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Julian demonstrated a knowledge not only of the European market but also of the winemaking process. His questions were technical, precise, showing an understanding that went beyond a simple salesman. "May I ask how you control the acidity in your Chardonnay? I've noticed you achieve an exceptional balance very difficult to attain in this region." "It's a combination of factors," Evelyn explained, growing more interested. "The location of our vineyards on the northern slope, the yeasts we use, and a fermentation process my father has perfected over years." "Fascinating," Julian replied, leaning towards her. "And do you use French or American oak barrels?" The conversation lasted over an hour. What had started as an impromptu meeting turned into a passionate exchange about wine. Evelyn, normally reserved with strangers, shared details about family techniques she rarely mentioned. "It's refreshing to find someone who truly understands wine," she commented, as the conversation turned more personal. "Most sales reps only talk about numbers and marketing. Wine is much more than a product," Julian replied in an almost intimate tone. "It's history, it's culture, it's the expression of the land. You can't sell well what you don't deeply understand." At that moment the door opened, and Robert Sterling walked in. Seeing Julian, his expression changed. "Dad," Evelyn said, standing up, I'd like you to meet Julien Dubois from United European Vintners. He came for the appointment you had today. Robert frowned as he extended his hand. I don't recall scheduling any meeting for today, Mr. Dubois. Julien stood up elegantly and shook the patriarch's hand. It was an error on my office's part, he explained with apparent sincerity. Your daughter has been very kind to receive me despite the mix-up. My apologies. Robert looked at Julien, and then at his daughter, noticing something in Evelyn's expression, a special sparkle in her eyes, a slight inclination of her body towards the stranger. Evelyn, he said in a casual tone, could you ask them to bring us some samples of the 2017 Reserve? Since Mr. Dubois has come all this way, we should at least offer him a tasting. While Evelyn left, Robert gestured for Julien to sit. The atmosphere had changed. The cordiality remained, but now with a barely concealed caution. Mr. Dubois Robert began looking at him intently. I'm not familiar with United European Vintners, and I know all the major distributors in the market. Julien maintained his serene expression. We are a relatively new group, Mr. Sterling, although individually our members have been in the business for decades. And yet you seem very well informed about our production methods, Robert continued. Methods we don't share publicly. Julien smiled confidently. I have followed the trajectory of Sterling Vineyards for years, Mr. Sterling. Your reputation precedes you, and I have a rather educated palate. I can recognize specific techniques by tasting a wine. Robert nodded slowly, but his eyes remained vigilant. And how does a Frenchman end up representing distributors in California? The world of wine is small, Mr. Sterling. Julien replied calmly, and opportunities know no borders. As you well know. When Evelyn returned with an employee carrying several bottles and glasses, she immediately noticed the tension. Her father, normally warm with visitors, wore the expression she knew from difficult negotiations. The tasting proceeded with technical comments and increasingly specific questions from Robert. They weren't simple queries, they were tests. He was evaluating not only Julien's knowledge but also his intentions. Julien navigated the situation with surprising elegance. He answered with precision, never defensively, maintaining a calm smile that contrasted with Robert's growing unease. At the end of the meeting, as Evelyn walked Julien to the exit, Eleanor Sterling appeared in the hallway. Seeing the visitor, she recognized him immediately. You were at the awards gala, she said directly. Julien bowed his head. That's right, Mrs. Sterling. I had the honor of witnessing your well-deserved recognition. Eleanor studied him with the piercing gaze she had perfected over decades of dealing with people interested in getting close to the family. What a coincidence to find you here now, she commented, her voice sweet but her eyes alert. The world of wine is surprisingly small, Julien replied with his perfect smile. It was a pleasure to meet you formally. I hope we can continue this conversation soon. When Julien left, leaving his card with promises to send a proposal, the Sterling family gathered in Robert's private office. I don't like him, Eleanor said directly as soon as they closed the door. There's something about him that doesn't feel sincere. I agree, Robert nodded, drinking some water. He knows too much about us, and that story about the mixed-up appointment is too convenient. Evelyn looked at them, surprised. Don't you think you're being unfair? She protested. He's a professional who knows his stuff, he's polite, and he has contacts that could open important doors for us in Europe. Robert and Eleanor exchanged a look that Evelyn couldn't interpret. Honey, Eleanor finally said, taking her hands. You've learned everything about wine, about the land, about the business. But there's something you only learn with age, how to distinguish between those who approach you for who you are and those who do it for what you have. Mom, please, Evelyn replied, gently pulling her hands away. I'm not a starstruck teenager. I know a professional when I see one. What none of the three could imagine at that moment was that this seemingly casual encounter would mark the beginning of a tragedy that would forever change the destiny of the Sterling family. Why did Evelyn's parents feel that immediate distrust towards Julien? Was it simple parental protection, or had they detected something that their daughter, despite all her intelligence, couldn't see? 2 weeks after the meeting with Julien, the tension in the Sterling house was palpable. The elegant mansion built when the winery began to succeed had become the scene of frequent arguments between Evelyn and her parents. That night, the family dinner, a tradition that not even business trips interrupted, proceeded in an uncomfortable silence broken only by the sound of cutlery against plates. The dining room, with its large walnut table and walls decorated with paintings of vineyard landscapes, seemed larger and colder than usual. The warm light from the chandelier failed to dispel the tension hanging in the air. Eleanor broke the silence. The new label for the special reserve arrived this morning, she commented, looking for a neutral topic. The designer did an excellent job. I saw it, Evelyn replied dryly. It's nice. Robert sighed, setting his silverware on the table. Honey, we can't go on like this, he said directly. This situation is affecting the family and the business. The employees notice when there's trouble between us. Evelyn looked up, her eyes shining with frustration and defiance. Then stop treating me like I can't make my own decisions, she shot back. I've worked just as hard as you have to get the vineyards where they are. I deserve to have my judgment respected. We don't question your professional judgment. Eleanor intervened in a conciliatory voice. We question the intentions of a man who appeared out of nowhere with information he shouldn't have, and who is conveniently interested in you. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. Is that what you're worried about? That someone might be interested in me for something other than the sterling name and the vineyards? Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. Don't twist our words, he exclaimed, his voice louder than usual. You know perfectly well that's not what we mean. Don't I? Evelyn challenged. Because ever since Julian sent his proposal, all you've done is look for excuses to reject it. A proposal that could increase our European sales by 30%. Eleanor reached her hand across the table, trying to touch her daughters, but Evelyn pulled away. Evelyn, darling, she said, her voice soft but firm. It's not the proposal that worries us, it's him. There's something that doesn't add up. Your father has been looking into him. Looking into him, Evelyn interrupted, shocked. You've been investigating a potential partner behind my back. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when stressed. Yes, we have, he admitted without apology. Just like we investigate anyone who wants to do significant business with us. And there are strange things in his history. Evelyn dropped her napkin on the table and stood up. What strange things, Dad? She asked, crossing her arms. Tell me. Robert pulled out a folder he had prepared and placed it on the table. For starters, United European Vintners barely exists. It was created 3 months ago, and its decades of experience are impossible to verify because none of the supposed members appear in any industry records. He opened the folder and took out several documents. Furthermore, his background in France is murky. He worked for 3 different wineries in 5 years. All of them had financial problems after he left. Evelyn looked at the documents with skepticism. This doesn't prove anything, she said finally. New companies are formed every day, and the problems at those wineries could be due to many different things. And what about this? Robert continued, pulling out another sheet. He claims to have a master's in oenology from the University of Bordeaux, but when we contacted them, they have no record of a Julien Dubois. A shadow of doubt crossed Evelyn's face, but she quickly hid it. It could be a mistake, she defended with less conviction. Or maybe he used a different name. He wouldn't be the first person to change their name in a foreign country. Eleanor stood up and approached her daughter, taking her hands firmly. Evelyn, look at me, she pleaded, her voice full of concern. We've watched you grow up, become a brilliant and strong woman. We have never doubted your intelligence, but we have also watched you fall for this man in just a few weeks. I'm not in love, Evelyn protested, but the color in her cheeks said otherwise. Maybe you don't see it that way yet, Eleanor continued, but the way you talk about him, how you defend his every word, it's not just professional admiration, honey. Robert joined them. We built all of this from scratch, he said, gesturing towards the window where the moonlit vineyards were visible. Not just for us, but for you. To leave you a legacy you could be proud of. All we're asking is that you be careful with who you let into our family. Evelyn looked at her parents. She loved them deeply, respected everything they had built, but at that moment she felt they weren't seeing her as the professional adult she was, but as a child who needed protection. If you really trusted my judgment, she finally said, her voice low but firm, you would let me make my own decisions and learn from my own mistakes if I make any. She freed herself from her mother's grip and grabbed her purse. I'm going out, she announced. I need some air. Are you going to see him? Robert asked directly. Evelyn stopped at the door and turned to look at her parents' determination in her eyes. Yes, she replied without hesitation. I'm going to talk to Julian. I'm going to ask him directly about these supposed irregularities, because that's how adults resolve their doubts, by talking, not by spying. Evelyn, please, Eleanor interjected, her voice breaking. We just want to protect you. I'm not a little girl who needs protection anymore, Mom, Evelyn replied. And if you really want me to run the vineyards one day, you have to start treating me like the adult I am. With those words, she left the dining room, leaving her parents worried and silent. At the entrance of the house, while waiting for her car, Evelyn called Julian. Evelyn, what a pleasant surprise. I need to see you, she said directly. There are some things we need to talk about. Of course, he replied, his calm contrasting with her agitation. I'm at the Napa Grand. We can meet in the bar. As she drove along the roads winding through the vineyards, Evelyn felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, loyalty to her parents and the doubt they had planted in her. On the other, indignation at what she considered a lack of respect for her independence. And beneath it all, that attraction to Julian, which she didn't even want to admit to herself. What Evelyn couldn't imagine was that this family argument, this small crack in the unity that had always characterized the Sterlings, was exactly what Julian Dubois had been waiting to provoke. The first fissure in the fortress that Robert and Eleanor had built around their daughter and their empire. And as she drove away from her home, heading straight into the arms of the man her parents feared, the tragedy that would forever change the destiny of the Sterling family took one more step towards its inevitable conclusion. Was Evelyn choosing the wrong man over her own family? Or were her parents, out of overprotection, unable to see the opportunity that Julian represented? The answer was about to be revealed in the most painful way possible. Dawn had barely illuminated the vineyards when Robert Sterling was reviewing documents in his study. Deep, dark circles marked his face after several sleepless nights. The phone rang, shattering the silence. "Frank," he asked without preamble. The voice of his private investigator friend came clearly from New York. "Julian Dubois doesn't exist," Frank explained. "At least not until 7 years ago. The name first appeared in 2015 when he applied for a French passport." Robert gripped his pen tightly. "A false identity. I can't say for sure, but it's highly suspicious. Before 2015, there's no trace of him in any French records." "And what about the wineries where he supposedly worked? That's the interesting part," Frank continued. "The 3 wineries exist, but none of them remember an employee with that name. However, all 3 had a consultant named Antonio Santoro, who matches Dubois' description." "Santoro." Robert wrote the name in large letters. "Were you able to find out anything about him?" "What's strange is that all 3 wineries had serious problems after he left. One went bankrupt, another was sold for almost nothing, and the third is barely surviving." A chill ran down Robert's spine. "Was he ever formally accused of anything?" "No, everything looks legal on the surface. But I spoke to the owner of the winery that went bankrupt. He said Santoro had a knack for making himself indispensable and accessing privileged information." Robert looked out at his vineyards, the fruit of 30 years of sacrifice. "I need more, Frank. How did he go from Santoro to Dubois? What did he do during that time? I'm on it. I have a contact in Italy looking into it. I'll call you when I have something concrete." Eleanor came in with a cup of coffee and immediately noticed her husband's somber expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, placing the cup on the desk. Robert told her what he had discovered. Eleanor sat down, slowly processing the information. "We have to talk to Evelyn," she said finally. "Show her this." "We don't have definitive proof," Robert replied. "If we show her only theories, she'll take it as another sign of our disapproval. We need something irrefutable." Eleanor took her husband's hands. "How much longer?" "Every day, that man gets closer to our daughter. She hardly talks about anything else. Give me 1 more week. Frank is close to something big. If Julian really is this Antonio Santoro, there must be a reason for the identity change." That same afternoon, Thomas Bennett approached Robert as he was checking the wine presses. "Mr. Sterling, that Mr. Dubois is here again. He's with Miss Evelyn in the tasting room." "Did she invite him?" "It seems so. He arrived asking for her. He brought documents. They're talking about exports to France." Robert headed to the room and found Evelyn and Julian sitting very close, leaning over a tablet laughing. "Dad," Evelyn greeted without moving away from Julian. "Good you're here. Julian is showing me the projections for the French market." Julian extended his hand with a smile that seemed fake to Robert. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to see you again." Robert shook his hand briefly, his face serious. "I didn't know we had a meeting today." "We didn't," Evelyn intervened. "I invited him. His proposal has some very interesting points." Robert looked at the papers, restraining the urge to throw the man out. "Impressive," he commented in a neutral tone. "I'd like to see documented references for those contacts you mention. Something from, say, Italy. Do you have experience there too?" A flicker of alarm crossed Julian's eyes so fast it almost went unnoticed. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," he replied smoothly. "Although in Europe, personal relationships often carry more weight than paperwork." His expression didn't change, but a twitch appeared in his hand. "Some experience in Italy, though my focus is France and Spain." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent problem in the winery. Before leaving, Robert looked seriously at his daughter. "We need to talk tonight. It's important. That evening, while driving back home, Robert called Frank. I need that information as soon as possible. The situation is escalating. I was about to call you, Frank replied urgently. I found something big. My contact in Italy got police files. There was an investigation into Antonio Santoro for fraud when he disappeared from Italy in 2014. Robert felt his blood run cold. Disappeared, yes, literally. He left his Milan apartment one night and never came back. The police thought he had fled, but they didn't have enough evidence to pursue him internationally. I'm getting a photo to confirm if Santoro and Dubois are the same person. When will you have it? Tomorrow, hopefully. My contact is risking his job for this. Call me as soon as you have it, no matter the hour. Arriving home, Robert looked at the warm lights of the family mansion. A shiver ran through him, thinking of that man getting close to his family, winning Evelyn's trust. Tomorrow, he would have the definitive proof. Tomorrow, he would confront Julien Dubois or Antonio Santoro with the truth. Tomorrow, he would protect his family and everything they had built. But the tomorrow Robert Sterling imagined would never come. What dark secrets was Julien really hiding under his perfect facade? What would Robert have discovered if he had had one more day? Rain fell hard on Napa Valley, turning the roads between vineyards into slippery traps. In the Sterling's dining room, the family dinner proceeded in tense silence. Evelyn barely touched her food, avoiding her parents' gazes. Eleanor tried to talk about the upcoming harvest while Robert constantly checked his phone. Are you expecting an important call? Eleanor finally asked. Frank, he was supposed to confirm something, he replied vaguely. Evelyn dropped her fork with a clatter. I know you're waiting for information about Julien. I'm not stupid, Dad. Yes, I'm waiting for information about him, Robert admitted. And when I have it, we're going to talk as you promised. Why not now? She challenged. What more do you need to accept that you're wrong? Robert took a deep breath, controlling himself. Evelyn, there are very serious things in his history that any responsible business owner would investigate. Things like what? Like the fact that Julien Dubois didn't exist 7 years ago, Robert replied. Like the wineries where he claims to have worked don't remember him by that name. Like there's a man named Antonio Santoro, identical to him, who disappeared from Italy just as Julien appeared in France. Evelyn paled briefly, then her face hardened. That can't be true. It is. And there's more. Frank is sending me proof that would confirm Julien and this Santoro are the same person. And what if they are? Evelyn stood up, trembling slightly. People change their names for many reasons. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. Or maybe he was fleeing a fraud investigation, Robert retorted, also on his feet. Doesn't it seem strange to you that someone with such a dubious past shows up interested specifically in our winery, in our family, in you, Eleanor, stood between them? Please, let's calm down, she pleaded. Evelyn, your father just wants to protect you, to protect what we've built. Protect me, Evelyn shook her head. By spying behind my back. If you wanted to protect me, you'd trust my judgment. Robert's phone rang. Seeing the caller ID, his face tensed. It's Frank. Do you have it? He asked directly. The voice was choppy due to the storm. Yes. The photo. Police file. It's definitely him. I also found a connection. Powerful family. Frank, I'm losing you. What connection? With what family? Dangerous. Robert, not just a con artist, has contacts. You should. The call dropped. Robert tried to call back but only got voicemail. The storm. When he returned to the dining room, Evelyn's phone buzzed. It's Julien, she said. He's asking if I'm okay. He says he tried calling the house, but the line seems busy. He called the house, Robert frowned. Why? To confirm our meeting tomorrow. We're going to review the final proposal before presenting it to the board. There will be no meeting until we clear up who this man really is. Evelyn put her phone away and faced her parents. You can't forbid me from seeing him. I'm an adult. We're your parents. Eleanor replied, soft but firm. And also the owners of this company. If this man is a threat, he's not a threat, Evelyn exclaimed. He's the only person who sees me as a professional, not as a child who needs to be controlled. Robert approached his daughter, his tone softer now. Just give me until tomorrow. Frank will send all the information. If we're wrong, I'll be the first to apologize to Julien personally. Evelyn finally nodded. Fine. Until tomorrow. But if there's no proof, I expect both of you to stop interfering. At that moment, the landline rang. Eleanor answered. Sterling residence. Yes, he's here. One moment. Covering the receiver, she turned to her husband. "It's Carlos, the mechanic. He says it's urgent, something about the car." Robert took the phone. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Are you sure? And who authorized it?" "I understand. Thanks for letting me know." When he hung up, his face was alarmingly pale. "The Mercedes," he explained. "Carlos says someone took it to the shop last week for a checkup I never authorized. He noticed something strange with the brakes." Strange how Eleanor asked tense. "He's not sure, but he'd rather we not use it until he checks it himself tomorrow." Evelyn looked at her parents, a shiver running through her despite her earlier anger. "Do you think someone tampered with it on purpose?" "I don't know," Robert replied, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm not taking any chances. We'll use the SUV until Carlos checks it." A real sense of danger now hung in the room. Evelyn's phone rang again. "It's Julian again. He wants to know if he can pick me up for dinner." "No," her parents said in unison. "Tell him we're in a family meeting," Robert said. "Don't mention anything about the investigation or the car." Evelyn sent the message, her hand trembling. "I can't believe we're thinking that Julian—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't know anything for sure," Eleanor said, hugging her. "But we can't ignore so many coincidences." "I'm going to the study to email," Frank Robert said. "I need that information now." "I'll go with you," said Eleanor. "I don't want to be alone tonight." They looked at Evelyn, hoping she would join them. "I need to be alone for a moment," she replied. "This is too much." Her parents nodded. Robert kissed her forehead. "We love you, Evelyn." "Everything we do is for you." "I know," she whispered. Minutes later, Evelyn heard raised voices from the study. "I can't wait until tomorrow," Robert was saying. "I'm going to Frank's contact's place now." "In this storm, it's dangerous," Eleanor protested. "Especially if we're not sure about the SUV's condition. We have no choice." If Julian is who Frank thinks he is, every minute counts. He could disappear as soon as he suspects we're onto him. Evelyn returned to the dining room as her parents entered with their coats on. "Evelyn, we're going out," Robert explained. "I need to pick up some important documents." "In this rain?" she asked, genuinely worried. "Can't it wait?" "No, it can't. Stay here and lock up. Don't open the door for anyone." "We'll be back soon." Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly. "We love you more than anything in this world," she whispered. "Never forget that." "Be careful," Evelyn pleaded. "The road must be dangerous." "We always are," Robert smiled. "We'll be back before you know it." The door closed, and Evelyn was left alone, with the sound of the rain as her only company. She didn't know it would be the last time she would see her parents alive. 3 hours later, the doorbell woke her. She had fallen asleep on the sofa. Confused, she looked at the clock, 11:42 p.m. Opening the door, she found 2 drenched police officers. Their faces said it all before they spoke. "Miss Sterling, I'm Officer Ramirez. May we come in?" Evelyn nodded mechanically. "My parents" was all she could say. "I'm sorry to inform you there's been an accident. The SUV went off the road on the scenic overlook curve. It appears they lost control in the rain and—" Evelyn wasn't listening anymore. A buzzing filled her ears as the words "died on impact" floated like ghosts. She collapsed to the floor, a heart-wrenching scream escaping from her soul. Hours later, after the officers had left, Evelyn remained motionless in the foyer. She hadn't cried. The pain was too deep for tears. Her phone vibrated. A message from Julian. "I just heard about the terrible accident. I'm on my way. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this." Evelyn stared at the screen, a terrible thought slowly forming. How had Julian found out about the accident so quickly? The doubt began to grow within her grief, but she was too shattered to process it. When the doorbell rang 20 minutes later and she opened it to find Julian with a look of concern, Evelyn did the only thing her broken heart would allow. She sought comfort in the arms of the man who unknowingly could be responsible for her pain. Was it really an accident that killed Robert and Eleanor Sterling, or was there an invisible hand behind it all? The gray dawn seeped through the windows as Evelyn woke up. For a few seconds, she couldn't remember why she felt so empty. Then, reality hit her. Her parents were dead. She was alone. She slowly got up from the sofa. She didn't remember falling asleep. She only remembered Julian's voice, offering her tea, as her world fell apart. "Good morning," Julian said from the doorway. He was perfectly dressed as if he hadn't spent the whole night there. "I made you some coffee." Evelyn looked at him confused. Part of her was grateful not to be alone. Another part remembered her parents' suspicions. "Thank you. You didn't have to stay all night." "I couldn't leave you alone," he replied, sitting beside her. "Besides, there was a lot to organize. The funeral home called while you were sleeping," he explained gently. "They needed decisions about the service. I took the liberty of making some basic arrangements, but everything is pending your approval." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. The idea of planning her parents' funeral was too much. "I can't. I don't know if—" "You don't have to do anything you don't feel up to." Julian took her hand. "I can take care of the practical things. You just focus on breathing, on getting through this 1 minute at a time." The tears that hadn't come during the night began to stream down her cheeks. "How am I going to go on without them? You won't be alone, I promise you." The doorbell rang. Julian answered, returning with Thomas Bennett and Rachel Stein. Both had red, swollen eyes. Thomas, who had worked with Robert from the beginning, awkwardly hugged Evelyn. "My girl," he murmured, his voice cracking. "What a terrible tragedy." Rachel remained more composed, though visibly affected. "We're here for whatever you need," she said simply. "Anything." Over the next few hours, the house filled with people, employees, neighbors, friends. They all arrived with sad faces and words Evelyn barely heard. She moved like an automaton, nodding, thanking, letting herself be hugged while a part of her watched everything from a distance in disbelief. And in the midst of it all, always nearby but never imposing, was Julian. He received visitors, organized flowers, answered calls, offered drinks, handling every detail with an efficiency that everyone noticed and appreciated. "It's a blessing that he's here." Evelyn overheard a neighbor comment. What would the poor girl do without him? In the afternoon, while she was resting in her room, Rachel Stein knocked gently. "I'm sorry, but there are legal matters we need to address soon." Evelyn nodded, mentally grateful for the practicality. Talking about concrete issues was easier than facing the void. "What do you need? As you know, I'm the executor of the will," Rachel explained. "There are business decisions that can't wait, especially with the harvest underway." "I know. What do you recommend?" Rachel pulled out a folder. "You inherit everything, the vines, the winery, this house. But the daily operation needs a structure. We need to convene the board of directors present. The will establish your position as owner and—" The magnitude of the responsibility overwhelmed her. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to do it alone," Julian said from the doorway. "Excuse me," the door was open. Rachel looked at him with a neutral expression, though Evelyn noticed a tension. "We were discussing confidential matters, Mr. Dubois." "Of course," he nodded. "I just wanted to let you know that the funeral home has confirmed everything for tomorrow. I also coordinated the catering for afterward." "Thank you, Julian," Evelyn said. "I don't know what I would have done without you today." A warm smile lit up his face. "It's the least I can do." "May I suggest something regarding what you were discussing?" Rachel waited for Evelyn's nod. After she gave it, he continued. "Evelyn is going through the worst moment of her life," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Asking her to take on all these responsibilities right now could be too much. Perhaps it would be better to establish a transition period with support." "What kind of support are you suggesting?" Rachel asked, barely hiding her skepticism. "A temporary team," he replied without hesitation. "Thomas knows the operations better than anyone. You handle the legal side. I could contribute my international expertise. Together, we could hold everything together while Evelyn processes her loss." Evelyn felt a sense of relief at the proposal. The idea of facing the family business alone seemed impossible. "That seems sensible," she said, looking at Rachel. "Is that legally possible?" "It's possible if you authorize it as the owner," the lawyer replied. "But I would recommend establishing clear limits, defined timelines, and regular oversight." Of course, Julian intervened. "Everything must be transparent and temporary until Evelyn is ready." When Rachel left, promising to prepare the necessary documents, Evelyn felt exhausted, but with a plan. "You should rest," Julian suggested. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I don't think I can sleep," she replied, looking out at the vineyards that now belonged to her. "I know." Julian placed a hand on her shoulder. "But at least try to rest your body, even if your mind won't stop." As he headed to the door, a question that had been floating in her mind suddenly surfaced. "Julian, how did you find out about the accident so quickly last night?" He turned to look at her. "I was at the hotel when I heard the news," he explained naturally. "The receptionist's daughter works as a nurse at the hospital where they took your parents. She recognized their names and called her father. News travels fast in a small valley like this. The explanation sounded reasonable. Evelyn nodded, too tired to ask more. The following days passed in a blur of grief. The funeral, the endless condolences, the sleepless nights, the moments when reality would hit her again. And through it all, Julian was there, constant, solid, efficient. He handled visitors when she needed solitude. He sat with her in silence when she couldn't bear to be alone. He took notes in meetings when she couldn't focus. He fielded calls from reporters, coordinated urgent decisions with Thomas. Slowly, without Evelyn noticing, Julien Dubois became indispensable. 3 weeks after the funeral, Thomas asked to speak with her privately. They met when Julien had gone into town. "I need to ask you something." Evelyn Thomas began visibly uncomfortable, "And I ask you not to take it the wrong way." "What is it?" Thomas hesitated before continuing. "Do you remember your father was investigating Mr. Dubois?" Evelyn felt a chill. In the midst of her grief, she had almost forgotten her father's suspicions. "I remember. The night of the accident, your father was going to get important information from an investigator." Thomas continued. "Information that supposedly proved Mr. Dubois wasn't who he said he was." "How do you know that? Your father mentioned it to me that afternoon. He was very worried. He asked me to be vigilant, not to let Mr. Dubois access sensitive information about the winery." "And do you think those suspicions had any basis?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "I don't know for sure, but it seems strange how quickly he has assumed such a central role in everything in the winery, in the decisions in your life." "Julien has been my only real support these past weeks," she replied. "Without him, I don't know if I could have gotten out of bed each morning." "I understand, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe your parents were wrong too. I just think you should know that your father was about to discover something important that night." Before Evelyn could respond, the door opened, and Julien walked in with a smile that froze when he sensed the tension. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all," Thomas replied, standing up. "We were just finishing." When Thomas left, Julien approached Evelyn. "Is everything all right? You seemed upset." Evelyn looked at him, searching his face for any sign of falsehood. She only saw warmth and concern. "I'm fine, just tired." The months passed, and Julian's presence in Evelyn's life and at Sterling Vineyards solidified day by day. From temporary advisor, he became a permanent consultant. From emotional support, a constant companion. Soon, no one remembered how things worked before him. And Evelyn, though she occasionally remembered her parents' warnings, preferred not to probe too deeply. She told herself she would do it when the pain was less intense. But with each passing day, with each decision she delegated, with each responsibility, Julien assumed Evelyn became more dependent on the man who had meticulously orchestrated her downfall. Was he really helping her survive, or was he strategically occupying the space he had cleared by eliminating her parents? 2 years after the accident that changed everything, Sterling Vineyards was thriving. The press spoke of the company's rebirth, attributing the success to the perfect partnership between Evelyn Sterling and Julien Dubois, the expert who had revolutionized their export strategy. Few remembered that Julien had arrived as a simple consultant. Now he was director of international operations with an office next to Evelyn's. That spring morning in the boardroom, decorated with photos of the Sterling family, an important meeting was taking place. Evelyn, in an elegant blue suit, presided at the head of the table. At first glance, she seemed to have recovered from the tragedy. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. Only those who knew her well noticed that something had changed. The passion that once shone in her eyes when she spoke of wine had been extinguished. To her right, Julien was reviewing the quarterly figures with precision. "As you can see from the graph," he explained, pointing to the screen, "our exports to Europe have increased by 47% since the new strategy, especially in France, where our special reserve is in 3 Michelin-starred restaurants." Thomas Bennett on the other side of the table asked, "Do these contracts include the exclusivity clauses that Miss Sterling had established as a priority?" Evelyn answered before Julien could. "We've had to be flexible on that, Thomas. Julien convinced me that insisting on exclusivity would limit our growth." "But that exclusivity policy was key to your father's strategy," Thomas countered. "Mr. Sterling always insisted that it preserved the premium character of our wines." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Julien smiled conciliatorily. "Times change, Mr. Bennett, and strategies must evolve with them. I'm sure Mr. Sterling, being the visionary he was, would understand the need to adapt." Thomas visibly tensed. Evelyn cut off the discussion. "The decision is made, Thomas. The results speak for themselves. Let's move on." When the meeting ended and everyone was leaving, Thomas stayed behind. "Do you have a minute?" he asked Evelyn. Of course, she replied, though she glanced towards Julian, who was chatting with other executives outside. Evelyn, you're making fewer and fewer decisions for yourself, Thomas said, lowering his voice. Almost all the new policies come from Dubois, and you just nod along. Are you questioning my ability to run this company? You know I'm not. I'm questioning the influence that man has over you, and over your parents' legacy. Julian has been key to keeping this company afloat after the tragedy. The numbers don't lie. The numbers aren't everything. Your father valued tradition. Quality over quantity. Independence. All of that is changing. My father isn't here anymore. Evelyn's voice trembled. I have to make my own decisions. Are times you times making them, or is times he times making them for you? Julian returned at that moment, his smile unreadable despite the obvious tension. Pardon me, Evelyn. The representatives from the association are waiting for you about the Innovation Award. I'll be right there, she replied, visibly relieved. When Evelyn left, Julian looked at Thomas with an expression that for the first time showed something cold beneath his friendly surface. Mr. Bennett, I value your dedication to this company. Decades of loyal service. It would be a shame if unnecessary conflicts were to tarnish that record, don't you think? My loyalty is to the Sterling family, and their legacy, Mr. Dubois. It always has been. Of course, and the future of that legacy is now in Evelyn's hands. She needs support, not more doubts. That afternoon, while Evelyn and Julian were touring the vineyards, Rachel Stein requested an urgent meeting. In Evelyn's office, where photos of her parents still hung, the lawyer showed her concern. I received the proposal for the Asian distributors. There are problematic clauses. What kind of clauses? Evelyn asked. Rachel pointed to several points in the document. This section on exclusive representation rights would grant the Japanese distributor authority to make decisions that have always been exclusive to the Sterling family. Julian leaned over to review the paper. It's standard practice in Asia, he explained in a patient tone. Their business culture values relationships of trust. This clause is more symbolic than real. With all due respect, it's not cultural, it's legal, Rachel retorted. This clause, along with these others, could be interpreted as a partial cession of control. In a dispute, a court would rule against us. Julian smiled indulgently. Rachel, I appreciate your diligence, but you're being overly cautious. I've negotiated personally with Mr. Tanaka. I assure you he understands the boundaries. Verbal promises have no legal value, Rachel insisted, looking at Evelyn. As your lawyer, I must warn you of the risks. These clauses should be renegotiated. Evelyn looked at them both. There was a time when she would have studied every word of the contract. That time seemed very distant now. What do you think, Julian? She asked, implicitly delegating the decision. We could ask for some minor clarifications, he replied diplomatically. But I wouldn't risk the whole deal over technicalities. This expansion into Asia is crucial to our plan. We'll do that then, Evelyn decided. Rachel prepare an addendum with clarifications, but keep the spirit of the agreement. The lawyer pressed her lips together, clearly disagreeing. As you wish. I'll prepare the document. When Rachel left, Julian smiled at Evelyn. You made the right decision. Rachel is excellent, but sometimes lawyers see threats where there are only opportunities. Evelyn felt a vague unease. Lately, that feeling had been appearing more often. The impression of losing something important, of straying from her parents' vision. Do you think my parents would be proud? She asked in a low voice. Of what we're doing with the company. Something unreadable crossed Julian's gaze before he answered. They would be immensely proud, he said, taking her hand. You've transformed pain into strength. You've taken their legacy to new heights. What parents wouldn't be proud? His words sounded sincere. And yet, Evelyn remembered her father's expression that last night, his insistence that he had discovered something important about Julian. For 2 years, she had avoided those questions, afraid of losing her only support. I have a surprise, Julian said skillfully, changing the subject. I've prepared something special to celebrate our engagement. The ring on Evelyn's finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, glittered in the light. 6 months earlier, after a romantic dinner, Julian had proposed. She had accepted almost without thinking. What surprise! A special commemorative wine, he explained with enthusiasm. An exclusive blend with the best grapes from the original parcel, the one your parents planted at the beginning. It will be called Sterling and Dubois Eternal Union. It will be our way of honoring the past, while looking to the future. The mention of the original parcel stirred conflicting emotions in Evelyn. The gesture seemed beautiful, but something about seeing the name Dubois next to Sterling on a bottle from the family's founding vineyard made her uncomfortable. "That's lovely," she replied with a forced smile. "I'm sure it will be an exceptional wine." "It will be. And it will be just the first of many projects together when we're married." The wedding. It was 3 weeks away. Everything was arranged: the ceremony at the cathedral, the reception in the gardens, the international guests, the coverage in magazines. Speaking of the wedding, Julian continued, "We have the final meeting with the planner this afternoon. There are details about the seating chart I want to review with you." "I trust your judgment," Evelyn replied automatically. "You know those things aren't my strong suit." Julian smiled, visibly pleased. "Even so, I'd like you to be there. It's our special day." During the meeting with the planner, Evelyn remained quiet while Julian made decisions about flowers, music, and layout. Only when the head table was mentioned did she show interest. "Where will we put the photos of my parents?" she asked, interrupting. An awkward silence followed. The planner looked at Julian for direction. "About that, darling," Julian intervened gently. "I was thinking it might be better not to have photographs at the ceremony. I wouldn't want the happiest day of your life to have any sadness." Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "But I want them to be present in some way." "They're my parents, Julian. They should be part of my wedding." Julian took her hand with a sympathetic gesture. "I understand, I really do. But think about our guests, the image we want to project. A wedding is a celebration of the future, not the past. Don't you think your parents would want this day to be purely happy?" Evelyn felt a wave of rebellion at the manipulation of her feelings. "My parents would want to be present at my wedding," she replied with unusual firmness. "And I want their photos in a place of honor. It's not negotiable." Something cold flickered in Julian's eyes, an expression Evelyn had never seen, and that sent a shiver down her spine. But it vanished quickly. "Of course, my love," he conceded with his perfect smile. "If that's what you wish, it shall be done. We'll make a small memorial table, discreet but dignified." That night, while Julian was meeting with investors in the city, Evelyn wandered through the mansion alone. She stopped in front of her favorite photo of her parents, taken on their anniversary, both of them among the vineyards at sunset, smiling in love, proud. "I miss you both so much," she whispered, touching her mother's face. "I wish you could advise me now." Her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. "I need to talk to you in private. Urgent. Without Julian. Tomorrow morning at my house, if you can. It's about what your father was investigating." Evelyn read the message twice, feeling her heart race. For 2 years, she had avoided digging into her father's suspicions, afraid of discovering that the man who had supported her in her worst moment was not who he seemed. But now, 3 weeks from permanently joining her life to Julian's, from giving him legal control over the family empire, the buried doubt was emerging with force. With trembling fingers, she replied, "I'll be there." As she looked at her parents' photos, a disturbing question took shape. Was Julian really helping her preserve the family legacy, or was he slowly and methodically taking it over? Had she already ceded too much control, or was there still time to reclaim the reins of her life and her company? The boardroom of Sterling Vineyards shone in the morning light. Around the oak table sat representatives from the best European hotel chains buyers who could triple the distribution of the special reserve. Evelyn had worked all night on this presentation. After speaking with Thomas, something in her had changed. A small spark of independence had been rekindled. In her wine-colored suit and hair pulled back in an elegant bun, she looked like the true heiress of the Sterlings. On the table, she had arranged bottles for tasting and folders with her new marketing proposal. "Good morning, everyone," she began in a firm voice. "It's an honor to welcome you to Sterling Vineyards, the home my family has built over 3 generations." The executives nodded respectfully. The reputation of Sterling wines was well known, and Evelyn's story had captured the industry's sympathy. "Today I want to present our new premium reserve line created for luxury hotels." She continued, displaying her presentation. "We have developed 3 exclusive varieties that will only be available in establishments like yours." As she explained each wine, she noticed that Julian to her right was repeatedly checking his phone. "What makes these wines special is the manual selection of the grapes. We use only 15% of our harvest, choosing the clusters that—" "Pardon me, Evelyn," Julian interrupted with his perfect smile, "but I believe there's a small mistake. It's 12%, not 15%. A brief silence followed the correction. Evelyn felt the heat in her cheeks. "As I was saying, we carefully select the best clusters to—" "You should also know," he interrupted again, addressing the guests that this line represents a shift from the traditional philosophy of Sterling Vineyards. Before, under Mr. Sterling, the winery was more conservative. The executives glanced between Julian and Evelyn, sensing the tension. "My father had a vision that we respect," Evelyn clarified. "What we are doing is expanding it, not replacing it." "Of course, darling," Julian replied in a tone that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "I just wanted to explain that we now operate with more international criteria." The word darling in a professional meeting sounded like a small slap. Evelyn took a deep breath and continued with her presentation, showing sales projections. "As you can see, we estimate a 40% growth in the hotel sector with this strategy," she explained, pointing to the charts. "Our analysis indicates that these figures are somewhat optimistic." Julian interjected again. "Evelyn has an enthusiastic spirit that I adore, but at Sterling Vineyards we prefer to be prudent in our promises." The silence that followed was heavy. Rachel at the end of the table watched with evident discomfort. Thomas had clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles were white. Evelyn stood still for a moment, the laser pointer held in the air. Something new flashed in her eyes, a mix of humiliation and contained rage. "Julian is right," she finally said, her voice controlled. "It's always better to exceed expectations." The rest of the presentation proceeded with her constantly deferring to Julian, who took over the meeting until he seemed like the true owner of the winery. When the executives left, only Evelyn, Rachel Thomas, and 2 assistants clearing glasses remained. "That was a great presentation," Julian commented, apparently oblivious to the tension. "I think they liked our proposal." Evelyn didn't respond. She gathered her documents mechanically, without looking at anyone. "Are you feeling all right?" Julian asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You seem tense." "I'm perfectly fine," she replied, gently moving away. "Just tired." Rachel and Thomas exchanged glances. Neither spoke, but their expressions said it all. The situation had gone too far. "I'll take you home," Julian offered. "You need to rest. Remember, we have the wedding cake tasting tomorrow." "That's not necessary," Evelyn replied. "I have things to review here. You go on into the city. You have that meeting with the investors." Julian seemed surprised by her refusal, but quickly recovered his smile. "As you wish, darling. Don't work too hard." When he left, Rachel approached Evelyn. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" she asked in a low voice. "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, forcefully stuffing her documents into her briefcase. "It was just a professional difference of opinion." "Evelyn, that wasn't a difference of opinion." Thomas intervened. "That was a public humiliation." Evelyn stopped her hands, trembling slightly. "Since when?" Rachel asked, almost whispering. "Since when does he treat you like that in front of others? He doesn't treat me." Evelyn started but couldn't finish the sentence. "This has been getting worse," Rachel continued. "First it was small corrections in private. Now he openly contradicts you in front of important clients." Evelyn sat down, suddenly weary. "He doesn't mean any harm," she murmured without conviction. "He just wants what's best for the company." "No," Evelyn Thomas said firmly. "He wants what's best for Times, him asterisk. Can't you see the pattern? Every time you take initiative, he holds you back. He's creating an image, he's the brains, and you're just the heiress who needs help." The words hit Evelyn like cold water. Deep down, she knew they were right. She had been so grateful for Julian's support after losing her parents that she had ignored all the signs. "Tomorrow morning," she said, looking at Thomas. "As we agreed. I want to hear what you have to tell me." Thomas nodded gravely. "I'll be waiting." When everyone had left, Evelyn remained alone, looking out at the vineyards stretching to the horizon. The vines her parents had tended with so much love and that her father had protected so fiercely. A question spun in her mind as she contemplated the family empire that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Since when had Julian Dubois gained so much power over her company, over her life? And more importantly, was she ready to take back control even if it meant facing truths that could destroy the peace she had built after losing her? Parents Thomas Bennett's house was located north of the vineyards, a modest stone cottage the Sterling family had given him years ago. From his porch, you could see the sunrise illuminating the vines. Evelyn arrived at dawn. She had left without telling anyone, driving herself. She knew Julian was sleeping soundly after returning late. With any luck, he wouldn't even notice her absence. Thomas was waiting for her with fresh coffee and a worried expression. His simple living room was decorated with old photos of the first harvests with Robert Sterling. "Thank you for coming," the old man said, pouring coffee into a worn mug. "I know it wasn't easy to get away like this." She nodded, taking the mug to feel its warmth. What's so important that it couldn't wait? She asked, trying to sound calm. Thomas sat across from her and placed an old folder on the table. I've kept this for 2 years, he began, his voice emotional. I didn't know if the time would ever be right to show you. After what happened yesterday, I don't think I can wait any longer. He opened the folder and took out several papers. Evelyn immediately recognized her father's handwriting. Handwritten notes, dates, underlined names. These are the notes your father made during his investigation of Julian Thomas, explained. I found them in his personal desk the day after the accident, before Julian took control of everything. Evelyn touched the paper with a trembling hand, as if she could feel her father through his writing. Why didn't you show me this sooner? Thomas sighed deeply. At first you were so shattered that I was afraid this would only add to your pain. Then when Julian became so important to you, I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd choose to trust him over any evidence. Evelyn couldn't deny it. She would have defended Julian against everything in those first few months. And now? You think I'm ready? Now I think you're in danger, Thomas replied frankly. The wedding is approaching, and I've seen how he treats you. He doesn't even bother to hide it anymore. Evelyn began to review the notes. Names, dates, connections marked with arrows. Many were notations only her father would have understood, but some details stood out clearly. Santoro, Siam, is greater than Dubois, she read aloud. What does this mean? Your father suspected Julian had used another name before. He was verifying it the night of the accident. Evelyn kept reading until she stopped at a particular sheet. Her face paled. Mercedes unauthorized service. Mechanic, recommended by J.D. She read, her hand trembling. What does this mean? The Mercedes was your parents' car, Thomas confirmed gravely. Your father found out someone had taken it to the shop without his permission just before the accident. The mechanic who checked it had been recommended directly by Julian. A heavy silence filled the room. Evelyn dropped the papers, unable to hold them. But they used the SUV that night, not the Mercedes, she said, searching for any explanation that would deny what she was beginning to fear. Because your father got a warning call about the Mercedes brakes. That's why they took the SUV. What no one expected was that they would be driving in that terrible storm. Evelyn stood up, needing to move to escape what she was hearing. This doesn't prove anything, she said, her voice shaky. An unauthorized service doesn't mean... It doesn't prove it. Thomas agreed. But it's a very convenient coincidence, don't you think? Julian recommends a mechanic. The car goes to the shop without your father authorizing it. Someone warns about a problem with the brakes. Your parents take another vehicle, and they still die that same night. Evelyn leaned against the wall, feeling her legs might give out. Memories of that night flooded her mind. The argument about Julian, the dropped call from the investigator, her parents' urgent departure, and then Julian's swift arrival after the accident. How did he find out so fast? She murmured, remembering the question she had asked herself that night. Who, Julian? He got to the house shortly after I was notified of the accident. He said the hotel receptionist's daughter worked at the hospital and recognized my parents. Thomas approached with a grave expression. That's impossible, Evelyn. Your parents never made it to the hospital. They died instantly at the scene of the accident. The police came directly to notify you before they even moved the bodies. Evelyn felt the floor shift beneath her. It was true. The officers had told her clearly that her parents had died immediately. There was never a transport to the hospital. There was never time for a nurse to recognize them. Julian had lied. She sank onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. Thomas sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I know it's a lot to take in, he said gently, and I don't have all the answers. But there's something else you need to know. He took one last sheet from the folder, a receipt from a mechanic's shop. The business name was at the top, Rodriguez Auto Service. This is the place they took the Mercedes. I found it among your father's papers. The owner is Carlos Rodriguez, the same man who called your father to warn him. Evelyn took the receipt, seeing the date 3 days before the accident. Have you spoken to him? Thomas shook his head. I tried to find him after the accident, but the shop had closed. No one knew where he was. Until 2 weeks ago. Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise. You found him. He reopened his shop, but in Sonoma. I found out by chance talking to a supplier. I went to see him, but he refused to talk about it. He seemed scared. Evelyn stared at the receipt, a simple piece of paper that could hold the key to what really happened that rainy night. I need to talk to him, she said, with determination. I need to hear it from him directly. It could be dangerous. If Julian is involved as we suspect and he finds out you're investigating. She clutched the receipt in her hand, feeling a new resolve. I can't ignore this anymore, Thomas. Not after what you've shown me. If there's even the slightest chance that Julian had anything to do with my parents' death. She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too horrific to put into words. All the little oddities, the details that didn't fit how convenient the tragedy was for Julian. Was it really an accident, or something much worse? Her phone vibrated. A message from Julian. Good morning, beautiful. Where are you? I stopped by your room to have breakfast together. Evelyn looked at the screen with a shiver. The image of the man she shared her life with, whom she had allowed into every corner of her existence, was slowly changing before her eyes. Was she sleeping under the same roof as her parents' murderer? What do I tell him? She murmured. A half-truth, Thomas advised. Tell him you went out early to check on something in the vineyards. You need time to think without raising suspicion. Evelyn nodded and typed a vague reply. Then she looked at Thomas' determination in her eyes. I'm going to find out the truth. And, if Julian had anything to do with my parents' death. She left the sentence unfinished. But the promise of justice hung between them. Thomas nodded, recognizing the change he saw. The submissive Evelyn was disappearing, and in her place, the true daughter of Robert and Eleanor Sterling was emerging. What neither of them knew was that this search for the truth was just beginning, and that the most terrible revelations were yet to come. Rachel Stein's office in a discreet building in downtown Napa radiated professional efficiency. Shelves of law books, an orderly desk, and windows overlooking the mountains created an atmosphere of elegant sobriety. Evelyn had gone straight there after her meeting with Thomas without returning to the mansion. She needed answers before facing Julian again. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment, she said as she sat down. Rachel observed her intently. She noticed something different about Evelyn, a tension in her posture, an alertness in her eyes that had been absent for a long time. I always have time for you, she replied. How can I help? Evelyn took a deep breath before speaking. I want to review all the documents related to my marriage to Julian. Every single one. Rachel maintained her neutral expression, though a flicker of relief briefly crossed her eyes. Is there something specific that concerns you? Everything, Evelyn replied frankly. I want to understand exactly what I'll be signing, what power I'm giving him over the company, over the family estate. Without further questions, Rachel stood up and opened a safe in the wall. She took out several documents and placed them on the desk. These are the prenuptial and wedding agreements, she explained. Some already have your preliminary signature. Others are pending final review. Evelyn examined the documents, stopping at one particularly thick one. What is this? Rachel adjusted her glasses, becoming serious. It's the post-nuptial business management agreement. It defines how Sterling Vineyards will be managed after you're married. Evelyn began to review the document, but soon felt overwhelmed by the legal terms. Explain it to me in plain English, please. Rachel sat on the edge of her desk, removing her glasses. In plain English, this agreement would give Julian complete operational control of Sterling Vineyards after the wedding, she said finally. You would retain nominal ownership, but he would have full executive authority, personnel decisions, investments, market strategy, even the sale of assets up to a certain value. Evelyn felt short of breath. How is that possible? She stopped, remembering the many times she had signed documents Julian presented to her, trusting him blindly. I signed this preliminary version, Rachel confirmed. The final version requires your signature the day before the wedding. I showed it to you 3 weeks ago, but I barely looked at it, Evelyn finished ashamed. I trusted that you and Julian had reviewed everything. Rachel leaned forward, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Evelyn, I've tried to warn you several times. This agreement is extremely favorable to Julian. You're practically handing him the keys to the kingdom. Why didn't you insist? Evelyn asked, accusatory. Rachel's eyes showed hurt. I tried. Every time I expressed concern, Julian was present. He would downplay my warnings, dismiss them as legal overzealousness, and you seemed to prefer his explanation to mine. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. It was true. Every time Rachel had tried to discuss legal details, Julian would intervene with simple explanations that Evelyn accepted with relief, happy to avoid the complexities. There's more, Rachel continued, pulling out another document. This is the will you made 6 months ago, remember. Evelyn nodded vaguely, recalling it as another piece of paperwork Julian had suggested completing, just in case. If you were to die, Julian would inherit not only your share of the company, but also total control over the family, trust, the personal properties, everything. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. Is this type of arrangement normal? No, Rachel replied flatly. It's extraordinarily broad. Most business marriages maintain a clear separation between inherited family assets and marital property. This agreement practically erases that line. Evelyn stood up, needing to move to process what she was discovering. She walked to the window, contemplating the valley her family had helped transform. If these documents were signed, and something were to happen to me after the wedding, Rachel finished, Julien Dubois would instantly become the sole owner and controller of the entire Sterling Empire. With no oversight, no conditions, no obligation to answer to anyone, Evelyn turned with a new question. Rachel, these documents, who drafted them initially? The law firm Morales & Associates. And who hired them? Julien. He said it was a gift to you, to save you legal worries during the wedding preparations. Evelyn felt the pieces fall into place with terrifying precision. First Thomas's revelation about the car. Now these documents that practically handed everything to Julien. When do I have to sign the final version? The signing ceremony is scheduled for the day after tomorrow, Rachel replied. A small meeting with the lawyers witnesses a toast, Julien's idea, of course. Evelyn gathered all the documents. I need to study these thoroughly. Every clause, every implication. Rachel watched her, looking worried. Evelyn, if you are reconsidering this marriage, you must be very careful. From what I can see, Julien has invested a lot in ensuring this wedding happens. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated before pulling one last folder from her drawer. This is something I discovered 2 days ago, she explained. I was reviewing old contracts and found irregularities in the ownership structure of the North parcel. The original parcel. The first one my parents bought. Exactly. According to these documents, that parcel was transferred to a limited liability company called Future Investments LLC about a year ago. Evelyn frowned. That's impossible. That land would never be sold. It has immeasurable sentimental value to the family. It wasn't sold, Rachel clarified. It was transferred as part of an internal restructuring. Your signature is on the documents. I never signed anything like that. That's what I thought. Rachel turned the folder to show the signature. That's why I compared this signature with others of yours I have on file. There are subtle differences. Evelyn examined the signature immediately, noticing the differences from her own handwriting. Are you suggesting someone forged my signature? I'm not making formal accusations, Rachel replied cautiously. I'm just pointing out worrying inconsistencies. And who is the ultimate beneficiary of future investments? Rachel looked at her intently. According to corporate records, the company is registered in the Cayman Islands, but the authorized signatory is Antonio Santoro. The name hit Evelyn like a slap. Antonio Santoro. The same name her father had written in his notes. Asterisk, Santoro, is greater than Dubois. Asterisk, I need some air, she murmured, feeling the room close in. Rachel quickly opened a window and returned to Evelyn's side. I'm sorry. I know it's too much information at once. Don't be sorry, she replied, breathing deeply. I'm sorry I didn't pay attention sooner. I'm sorry I ignored your warnings. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelations hanging between them. What are you going to do? Rachel finally asked. Evelyn looked at the scattered documents, physical proof of a carefully planned betrayal. First, I need to confirm one more thing. Thomas told me about a mechanic, Carlos Rodriguez. I need to find him and hear his side of the story. And after that, Evelyn put the papers in her bag. I'll decide if I'm going to marry Julien Dubois or if I'm going to destroy him. Her phone rang. Julien's picture lit up the screen. With a calm that surprised her, Evelyn answered. Hello, Julien. Evelyn, darling, where are you? His voice sounded worried, but with that controlled tone she now recognized as calculated. I've been looking all over for you. We have the meeting with the florist in an hour. Evelyn glanced at Rachel, who gave an encouraging nod. I'm with Rachel, reviewing some legal details, she replied naturally. I forgot. Could you handle the florist? I trust your taste. A brief silence on the line. Of course, no problem. What kind of legal details? Nothing important. Just formalities about the stock transfer after the wedding. Rachel wants to make sure everything is in order. I see. Will you be home for dinner tonight? Of course, she replied, forcing a loving tone. I'll see you there. When she hung up, Evelyn and Rachel exchanged looks. I have 3 days before the signing ceremony, Evelyn said. 3 days to uncover the whole truth, to find out if the man I'm about to marry killed my parents. Rachel looked at her with admiration and concern. Be careful. If your suspicions are correct, we're talking about someone who has already shown how far he's willing to go to get what he wants. Evelyn nodded gravely, a new determination in her eyes. It's time for Julien Dubois to find out that I am Robert Sterling's daughter, and I will not hand over my family's legacy without a fight. What Evelyn didn't know was that time was running out faster than she imagined, and that the final confrontation would come sooner than expected. Was she really ready to face the whole truth? And more importantly, was she prepared for what she would have to do when she knew it? The auto shop Rodriguez Auto Service was on the outskirts of Sonoma, an hour from Napa Valley. It was a modest building, clean but simple, with 2 work bays and a small reception area. Evelyn parked down the street, observing the place. She had lied to Julien about her plans, telling him she would be spending the day with the wedding planner. He accepted the explanation without question, busy with a meeting of his own. With her heart pounding, she finally entered. A small bell chimed as she opened the door. A man in his 50s in grease-stained overalls looked up. "Good afternoon. How can I help?" His voice trailed off as he recognized her, his face turning pale. "Miss Sterling." It wasn't a question. He clearly knew who she was. "Mr. Rodriguez, I presume," Evelyn replied. "Carlos Rodriguez." The man looked nervously towards the door as if seeking an escape. "The shop's about to close," he said hastily. "Maybe you can come back tomorrow." "I'm not here about my car," Evelyn clarified, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I'm here about my parents' Mercedes, the one you serviced 3 days before their death." Carlos Rodriguez grew even paler. His hands resting on the counter were visibly trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about," he murmured, though his eyes told a different story. Evelyn took a copy of the receipt Thomas had shown her from her purse and placed it on the counter. "This is your shop's receipt. Your signature, your stamp," she pointed out. "You serviced that car without my father's permission, and then you called him to warn him about a problem with the brakes." The mechanic looked at the receipt as if it were a venomous snake. After a long moment, he sighed deeply and pointed to a side door. "Not here," he said in a low voice. "Come to my office." The office was a small room in the back, just big enough for a cluttered desk and 2 chairs. Carlos closed the door and the blinds before sitting down heavily. "I shouldn't be talking about this," he said, running a hand over his tired face. "It was 2 years ago. I can't change what happened. I need to know the truth," Evelyn insisted. "Please." The mechanic looked at her for a long time as if gauging her sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "A man brought the car in," he began. "Said he worked for your father. He had an authorization that looked real with the Sterling Vineyards letterhead and what looked like Mr. Sterling's signature. Do you remember what the man looked like?" Carlos shook his head. "Young, well-dressed. I don't remember his face clearly. But it wasn't Mr. Dubois, if that's what you're thinking. It was someone else." Evelyn nodded, processing the information. "A middleman. So what happened next? I did the full service as the order indicated. Everything was perfect except..." He paused, as if it was hard to continue. "Except what I noticed something strange in the brake system. Small marks on the hydraulic line as if someone had tried to subtly damage it. It wasn't broken, but it had been tampered with to fail gradually." Evelyn felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "Are you sure? I've been a mechanic for 30 years, he replied with dignity. "I know when damage is accidental, and when it's intentional. This was sabotage designed for the car to fail within the next 48 to 72 hours of use." The horror of the situation hit Evelyn with its full force. Someone had deliberately tried to cause an accident that would kill her parents. "Why did you call my father?" "Because I knew something was very wrong," Carlos answered. "I explained what I'd found. I told him not to use the Mercedes under any circumstances until I could check it again and properly document the damage. And that night, they took the SUV instead," Evelyn completed. "But they still died in an accident." Carlos looked down, guilt evident on his face. "That's the part I never understood," he admitted. "How could they have a similar accident in a different vehicle? It was too much of a coincidence." "What happened after the accident?" "Why did you close your shop in Napa?" "The next day, I had a visitor. A man I'd never seen before. He told me he knew what I'd discovered, and that if I valued my safety and my family's, I would forget everything and leave Napa. He threatened you directly. He didn't have to. His message was clear." Carlos looked at her, tormented. "I have 2 kids. I couldn't risk it. So I sold the shop and we moved to Sonoma. I tried to forget the whole thing. Could you identify that man if you saw him again?" Carlos shook his head. "I'd rather not try. I've already said too much." Evelyn understood his fear. She gave him a card with her personal number. "If you remember anything else or if anyone threatens you again, call me directly. You're not alone in this." Leaving the shop, Evelyn felt as though her world had changed forever. There was no more room for doubt. Her parents had been murdered and all the evidence pointed in one direction. In her car, she saw 3 missed calls from Julian and several texts asking where she was. With trembling fingers, she wrote that she was on her way home, that the planner had kept her longer than expected. During the drive back, her mind worked frantically, processing everything she had discovered in the last few days. Her parents' car had been sabotaged. Julian had lied about how he found out about the accident. He was about to gain complete legal control of Sterling Vineyards. He had already secretly transferred property to a company linked to his true identity. The conclusion was clear and devastating. Julian Dubois had meticulously planned the destruction of her family to seize everything they had built, and she had been about to complete his plan, willingly handing him what was left of the Sterling Empire at the altar. Arriving at the mansion, Evelyn paused for a moment before going inside. She needed to compose herself to hide the storm raging within. She couldn't let Julian suspect she knew the truth, not until she had a plan. She found him in the main living room on the phone, discussing wedding details. Seeing her enter, he smiled and gestured for her to wait while he finished the call. "Perfect, so we'll confirm the white and gold flowers," he said before hanging up. "Evelyn, darling, where have you been? I've called you several times." "I'm sorry I had my phone on silent during the meeting," she lied with surprising ease. "It's been an exhausting day." Julian approached and kissed her cheek, a gesture that once would have seemed tender, but now made her feel sick. "You look tense," he commented, studying her face. "Everything all right with the preparations? Perfectly fine. I'm just tired. I think I need to rest a bit before dinner." "Of course. In fact, I have some important news. The Japanese investors have increased their offer for the distribution rights. They want to sign the deal during the wedding reception as a symbolic gift." The comment, seemingly innocent, held a sinister meaning in light of what Evelyn now knew. Another deal that would cede control signed during her wedding. "That sounds wonderful," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We can talk about it over dinner. Right now, I really need a moment alone." Julian nodded understandingly and let her go up to her room. The moment she closed the door, Evelyn slumped against it, the tears she had held back finally flowing. How had she been so blind? How had she not seen what was happening right in front of her? After several minutes, she managed to calm down. She needed to think clearly. She washed her face with cold water and sat on the bed considering her options. The police were not an immediate option. She had no concrete evidence, only suspicions and indirect testimony. Besides, Julian had had 2 years to cover his tracks. She could try to cancel the wedding, but that would alert Julian without stopping him. He had already proven how far he was willing to go. If he suspected she knew the truth, a shiver ran down her spine. No, she needed to be smarter. She needed a plan that would not only expose Julian but utterly destroy him and reclaim everything he had tried to steal. The sound of footsteps in the hall alerted her. She quickly grabbed a book from the nightstand and pretended to be reading when the door opened without a knock. "Sorry to interrupt," Julian said, entering with a folder, "but I just received the final documents for the signing ceremony the day after tomorrow. I thought you'd want to review them beforehand." Evelyn looked at the folder, recognizing it as the final version of the agreements Rachel had shown her. The documents that would hand everything over to Julian. "Thank you. I'll look them over tonight." Julian watched her with an intensity she once would have interpreted as loving concern. Now she saw it for what it was, a calculated evaluation. "You seem distant today. Are you sure you're just tired?" Evelyn took a deep breath, putting on her best impression of a stressed bride. "It's just wedding jitters, I guess. So many details, so many decisions. I feel overwhelmed sometimes." "It's understandable," he nodded, sitting beside her. "But remember, after the wedding, you can relax. I'll take care of everything, the company, the difficult decisions. You'll just have to enjoy the life we build together." The words, which once would have sounded comforting, now revealed their true controlling nature. Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted a docile puppet to give him legitimacy while he seized everything. "That sounds wonderful." Evelyn lied, unable to look him in the eye. Julian gently took her chin, forcing her to look at him. "It will be wonderful. Everything I've worked for, everything we've worked for, will finally come to fruition." For a terrifying instant, Evelyn thought she saw something dark peer out from behind Julian's perfect mask, a glimpse of his true nature that had been hidden for 2 years. She wondered if he could see the fear in her eyes, if he could feel the trembling of her body beneath his touch. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," he said, finally standing up. "Get some rest. We'll celebrate tonight. The commemorative wine I mentioned was bottled today. Sterling and Dubois Eternal Union. Our first joint legacy." When the door closed, Evelyn ran to the bathroom and was sick. The stress, the fear, and the repulsion combined in uncontrollable nausea. As she rinsed her mouth, she saw her reflection in the mirror. Red eyes, pale face, the image of a cornered woman. But in those same eyes, something else was beginning to shine. Something she had inherited from her parents: determination, courage, and a silent promise of justice. Her phone vibrated with a message from Rachel. "Did you speak to the mechanic? We need to meet." "I found something else," Evelyn replied quickly. "Yes." He confirmed everything. "Tomorrow morning at your office." "Can't talk now." Breathing deeply, she prepared for the dinner that awaited her. A dinner where she would toast with the man who had killed her parents, feigning love while an implacable resolution grew inside her. The question was no longer times if times she would confront Julien Dubois, but times how *** when times, and on what terms she would destroy him. Would she flee silently, saving herself but leaving her parents' murderer unpunished? Or would she confront him, risking everything for the justice her family deserved? The answer was taking shape in her mind as she walked down the stairs. A bold and dangerous idea that would require a courage she had never needed before. Because there was a third option, one that Julien would never expect to turn her own wedding, the event he had planned as his ultimate triumph, into the stage for his downfall. The pre-dawn light found Evelyn Sterling standing by her bedroom window, gazing at the vineyards her family had cultivated for decades. The sunrise painted the hills in shades of rose and gold, reminding her of the sunsets she used to watch with her parents from the terrace. In her hand, she held her graduation photo. She stood between Robert and Eleanor, all three smiling, oblivious to the fate that awaited them. All night, Evelyn had been awake, reviewing every discovery, every piece of the puzzle that now formed a clear and terrible picture. Julien Dubois, or Antonio Santoro, his real name, had meticulously orchestrated her parents' deaths, manipulated her grief, and nearly succeeded in seizing the entire Sterling legacy. Dinner the previous night had been torture. Every smile from Julien, every touch, every word about their future together made her sick. She had managed to play her part, feigning excitement for the wedding while a fierce determination grew inside her. Before sunrise, she made a decision that would change the course of everything. She would not cancel the wedding. She would not flee. She would not confront him in private. She would turn Julien's trap into her own. With silent steps, Evelyn left the mansion as the first rays of sun barely lit the path. She drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of Napa, a discreet place where no one would recognize her. Thomas and Rachel were already waiting their faces, showing the tension of those who understand the gravity of what they are about to undertake. "I've made my decision," Evelyn announced without preamble, sitting across from them. "The wedding is going forward." Thomas nearly spilled his coffee in surprise. Rachel, always more composed, studied Evelyn's face with professional attention. "I'm not running and I'm not giving up." Evelyn continued, her voice low but firm. "I'm going to turn his moment of triumph into his downfall. I'm going to expose Julien publicly in front of everyone at the altar." The determination in her eyes silenced any objection. This was not the vulnerable, manipulated Evelyn of the past 2 years. Before them sat the true daughter of Robert Sterling with the same unshakable strength that had characterized her father. For the next hour, the three of them mapped out a meticulous plan. Rachel provided the legal strategy, Thomas the necessary contacts, and Evelyn, the centerpiece herself, transformed from victim to avenger. "We'll need irrefutable evidence," Rachel pointed out, making precise notes. "All we have now are suspicious circumstances and indirect testimony. It won't be enough for a conviction." Thomas nodded, his weathered face showing a new energy. "I have a friend in the state police. Captain Jimenez worked with your father on several occasions. He trusts the Sterling family. He might help us discreetly." Evelyn listened, absorbing every detail, every suggestion. Her mind, dormant for so long from grief and manipulation, was now working with astonishing clarity. "The key will be to keep Julien completely unaware of our suspicions," she finally said. "He must believe everything is going according to his plan, until the very last moment." The coffee grew cold in their cups as they refined every aspect of the plan, the sequence of events, the key people, the contingencies. They could not afford any mistakes. "Are you sure about this?" Evelyn Thomas asked when they finished. "It will be emotionally devastating for you." A cold smile formed on Evelyn's lips, an expression they had never seen on her face before. "I've spent 2 years being manipulated by my parents' murderer," she replied with chilling calm. "I have let him sleep under my roof, kiss my lips, plan our future. I have signed documents that hand him my family's legacy." "The emotional devastation has already happened, Thomas. All that's left is justice." As they parted, each with their assigned tasks, Rachel briefly squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. "Robert always said that the truth, like good wine, always comes to the surface." Evelyn nodded, recognizing her father's favorite words. For 2 years, she had been asleep, anesthetized by pain, manipulated by a predator who had calculated every step. But now she was awake, and her awakening would be Julien Dubois' nightmare. As she drove back to the mansion, the sun now high over the vineyards, Evelyn mentally reviewed the days ahead. The final dress fitting the document, signing ceremony, the final rehearsals. Each event now held a double meaning, every fake smile a hidden purpose. Julien was waiting for her on the terrace, breakfast served with that perfect smile she now saw as the mask it truly was. "Up early, darling?" he asked, rising to kiss her. "Everything all right?" Evelyn returned the smile, playing her part to perfection. "Perfectly fine," she answered. "I just needed some fresh air." "Bridal nerves, I suppose." "Only 3 days left," he commented, pouring her coffee. 3 days, and we'll officially be the Dubois Sterling's owners of the most prestigious wine empire in Napa. Evelyn raised her cup in a small toast, her eyes now able to see the glint of barely concealed ambition in Julian's gaze. 3 days, she repeated. "Everything is going to change after the wedding, isn't it?" "All for the better, my love," he replied, never imagining the true meaning behind Evelyn's words. All for the better. Indeed, everything would change. But not in the way Julien Dubois expected. In 3 days, the submissive bride he thought he had molded to his liking would disappear forever. And in her place, dressed in the red of the blood he had spilled, would emerge the justice the Sterlings deserved. What exactly was Evelyn Sterling preparing for her wedding day? The plan was just beginning to take shape. And time was running out. The wedding dress hung majestically in the center of the fitting room, white Italian silk, handcrafted lace, tiny pearls sewn by hand. Evelyn watched it with an unreadable expression as the seamstress made the final adjustments. Beside her, a friend's mother, who had agreed to accompany her, sighed with emotion at the beauty of the garment. "You'll be stunning, dear," the woman commented. "Julien will be breathless when he sees you." Evelyn smiled politely, thinking how true that prediction would be, though not for the reasons the woman imagined. "Could I have a moment alone?" she asked kindly. "I'd like to just look at the dress one last time before the final alterations." When the seamstress and her companion left the room, Evelyn pulled out her phone and took several detailed photos of the dress. Then she dialed a number she had memorized that morning. "It's me," she said, in a low voice. "I need you to replicate this dress exactly, but in crimson red. I'm sending the photos now." "Yes, by the day after tomorrow, without fail. Price is not an issue." She hung up just as the door opened again. The seamstress returned with a small box of pins. "Ready for the final fitting, Miss Sterling?" "Completely ready," Evelyn replied with a serenity that surprised even herself. Meanwhile, in the office of Captain Jimenez of the State Police, Thomas Bennett was discreetly presenting a file with all the collected information. The officer, a sturdy man with salt and pepper hair who had known Robert Sterling for years, listened with a grave expression. "I understand the gravity of the accusations, Thomas," he said finally. "But we need more solid proof to act. Suspicions, coincidences, and indirect testimony won't be enough in front of a judge, especially against someone with the resources this Dubois seems to have." "We know," Thomas replied. "That's why Evelyn has devised this plan. We need your discreet presence at the wedding with officers ready to act when she gives the signal." Captain Jimenez frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the strategy. "It's risky. If this man is really who you think he is, he could be dangerous when he's cornered. That's why we also need your help with this." Thomas pulled out another document. "These are the forensic tests we want performed on the SUV, where Robert and Eleanor died. The local police concluded it was an accident due to the storm, but they never investigated the possibility of sabotage." The following hours passed in a sequence of carefully orchestrated movements. Rachel worked tirelessly, gathering documents, analyzing contracts, preparing formal complaints to be filed at the precise moment. Her contacts in the legal and financial worlds provided crucial pieces of the puzzle. In Sonoma, Carlos Rodriguez gave a private investigator hired by Evelyn his full testimony recorded and signed before a notary. His fear was evident, but the desire to do the right thing finally outweighed it. And at the Sterling mansion, Evelyn played the role of the ecstatic bride to perfection. She answered messages from guests, reviewed reception details, discussed the menu with the chef. Julian, busy with business meetings that Evelyn now understood were part of his plan to consolidate control, barely noticed the calculating glint that sometimes appeared in his fiancée's eyes. The night before the signing of the legal documents, Evelyn and Julian had dinner on the terrace under a starry sky. He had ordered her favorite wine and spoke animatedly about their future plans. After the honeymoon, I think we should consider expanding more aggressively into Asia, he commented, pouring her more wine. The Chinese market is hungry for premium wines like ours. Evelyn nodded, feigning interest while thinking of the message she had just received from Rachel. Documents prepared. The originals have been replaced. He won't notice the difference. By the way, Julian continued, the notary has confirmed everything for tomorrow. It will be a small ceremony, just us, the witnesses, and champagne to celebrate. You seem very excited about the signing, Evelyn observed casually. Almost more than about the wedding itself. A flicker of something dark crossed Julian's gaze, so brief that anyone else would have missed it. But Evelyn, now alert to every micro-expression, caught it clearly. They are equally important, darling, he replied, quickly recovering his perfect smile. The wedding unites us emotionally. The documents secure our practical future. Asterisk, our future times, Evelyn thought with bitter irony. The future Julian had meticulously planned, she as a decorative figurehead, he controlling the entire sterling empire, her parents' legacy in the hands of their murderer. That night, as Julian slept beside her, Evelyn lay awake, mentally reviewing every detail of the plan. Everything was in motion. The red dress would be delivered discreetly to Rachel's house tomorrow. The altered documents were waiting at the notary's office. Captain Jimenez had confirmed that preliminary forensic results from the SUV showed signs of tampering with the steering system. The pieces were falling into place with chilling precision. What had seemed like a tragic accident during a storm was now revealed as a perfectly executed crime. Julian had left nothing to chance. When the Mercedes was taken out of play thanks to the mechanic's warning, he already had a backup plan. A plan that had worked perfectly. Until now. The morning of the signing ceremony dawned bright and clear. Evelyn wore an elegant navy blue suit for the occasion, her face serene, her posture firm. Julian seemed more animated than ever, constantly checking his watch, anxious to get to the notary's office. Nervous, he asked, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. Not at all, Evelyn replied with an enigmatic smile. I feel like everything is exactly as it should be. The notary's office was a sober, elegant space in downtown Napa. When they arrived, Rachel was already there, exchanging words with the official. Thomas, one of the designated witnesses, would arrive later. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. Julian glanced over the documents superficially, his attention focused more on the outcome than the specific details. He didn't notice the subtle modifications. Rachel had introduced clauses that severely limited his control conditions, that protected the primary assets of Sterling Vineyards, terms that kept decisive power in Evelyn's hands. He signed with barely concealed enthusiasm. When he passed the pen to Evelyn, their fingers brushed briefly. Your turn, darling, he said, his eyes shining with anticipation. A small step for a great future. Evelyn signed each document with a steady hand, her face calm. Only Rachel could see the storm raging beneath that apparent calm, the contained force waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. When the last signature was dry, the notary officially sealed the documents and handed them over in their respective folders. Julian raised his glass of champagne in a toast. To us, he declared, to the future of the Dubois Sterlings. Evelyn gently clinked her glass against his, her eyes fixed on his. To the truth, she replied. May it always come to the surface, like good wine. The phrase, so similar to her father's favorite maxim, caused a momentary confusion in Julian, but he attributed it to the emotion of the moment and drank deeply from his glass, savoring what he considered his final victory. He couldn't know that the documents he had just signed, far from giving him the total control he expected, would be part of his downfall. Nor could he imagine that the woman smiling at him across the table had silently orchestrated a revenge as meticulous as the trap he himself had laid 2 years ago. The wedding day was approaching. Evelyn Sterling was ready. Her red dress was waiting, a symbol of spilled blood and pending justice. The authorities were alerted, the evidence gathered, the witnesses prepared. The trap was set. Would Julian Dubois be able to see the danger before it was too late? Or would he walk straight into his own destruction, blinded by the ambition that had guided him from the beginning? The answer awaited at the altar, where a bride in red would end 2 years of lies with a devastating truth. Grace Cathedral glowed under the Napa Valley sun. White and gold flowers adorned every pew, every column, every corner of the majestic building. The 200 guests, the elite of the international wine industry, had already taken their seats, murmuring with excitement for the union they were about to witness. The marriage of Evelyn Sterling, heiress to the most prestigious wine empire. In the valley to Julien Dubois, the respected French businessman who had supported her through her darkest hour. In a small side room, Julien made a final adjustment to the bow tie of his impeccable black tuxedo. His face reflected a confident serenity, the expression of a man about to reach the pinnacle of his ambitions. Thomas Bennet watched him from the doorway, his expression unreadable. 15 minutes, the old man announced. The guests are ready. Julien nodded, casting one last appreciative glance at his reflection. Thank you, Thomas. It's been a long road to get here, hasn't it? Longer for some than for others, Thomas replied enigmatically before withdrawing. In another more distant room, Evelyn stood alone, contemplating two dresses, the traditional white one visibly displayed on a mannequin, and the intense red one hidden in a side wardrobe. Rachel had just left, confirming that everything was in place. Captain Jimenez and 6 plainclothes officers were strategically positioned among the guests. Carlos Rodriguez waited in a nearby room, nervous but determined. Evelyn took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. Images of the last few days flashed through her mind, the intense preparation, the sleepless nights, the constant adrenaline of playing a role in front of the man who had destroyed her family. But most of all, she remembered her parents, Robert and Eleanor Sterling. Tireless workers, dreamers, protectors, the people she had loved most in the world, snatched away by the calculated ambition of a predator. With deliberate movements, Evelyn let the robe covering her body fall to the floor. The white dress remained untouched on its mannequin. Standing before the mirror, she contemplated her figure wrapped in red silk, a color as intense as blood, as vibrant as the justice she was about to unleash. The red dress hugged her body like a second skin, the skirt cascading to the floor with a fierce elegance. No veil, no tiara, no traditional bridal adornments. Her dark hair fell freely over her shoulders, and her lips painted the same intense red as the dress contrasted dramatically with the paleness of her face. A soft knock on the door announced it was time. The wedding march began to play in the distance, its solemn notes filtering through the thick stone walls of the cathedral. At the altar, Julien waited, his perfect smile illuminating his face as the guests watched him with admiration. To his left, Father William nervously reviewed his notes, preparing to officiate the ceremony. No one seemed to notice Captain Jimenez, and his men strategically distributed near the exits. The large, carved wooden doors remained closed, the bride still hidden behind them. The music reached its crescendo, signaling the moment of the entrance. An expectant silence fell over the congregation. The doors opened slowly. The impact was instant and absolute. Where everyone expected to see a traditional white gown, a vision in vibrant red appeared. Evelyn Sterling, erect and solemn, advanced down the center aisle, with measured, firm steps. She carried no bouquet. She did not smile. Her eyes, intense and clear, were fixed on Julien. A murmur of confusion rippled through the cathedral. Surprised faces exchanged glances, expressions of bewilderment. At the altar, Julien's smile faltered for a moment. A muscle tensed in his jaw. A brief flash of alarm crossed his gaze before he regained his composure. With every step Evelyn took toward the altar, the silence grew denser, almost tangible. No one understood the meaning of this dramatic break with tradition, but everyone instinctively felt they were witnessing something extraordinary. When Evelyn arrived beside Julien, Father William cleared his throat, nervously thrown off by the bride's unusual attire. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to one moment," Father Evelyn interrupted, her voice clear and serene. "Before we begin the ceremony, there's something I must say." She turned to face the guests. 200 faces watched her with absolute attention. Among them, Rachel and Thomas exchanged tense glances. Captain Jimenez gave an imperceptible signal to his men, who readied themselves to act. "Many of you must be wondering why I have chosen to wear red to my wedding." Evelyn began, her voice firm but charged with emotion. "White symbolizes purity and innocence. Red represents many things: passion, love, and blood." Julien took a step towards her, trying to take her arm with a tight smile. "Evelyn, darling, you're just nervous. We can proceed with the ceremony." She pulled away with a gentle but decisive movement. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice low but perfectly audible in the sepulchral silence. "You will never touch me again." Julien's smile froze his eyes, now watchful, calculating. He understood that something had changed, but he still didn't grasp the magnitude of the danger. Evelyn turned back to the guests who were watching the scene with growing stupefaction. "Exactly 2 years and 3 months ago, my parents Robert and Eleanor Sterling died in what we all believed was a terrible accident. That night I lost not only my parents but also a part of myself. The grief blinded me, weakened me, made me vulnerable. Her eyes filled with tears, she refused to shed her voice, taking on a deeper tone. And in that moment of greatest vulnerability, Julien Dubois appeared. My support, my comfort, my savior. The man who never left my side, who helped me get back on my feet, who restored my faith in the future. Julien seemed to relax slightly, misinterpreting her words as a turn towards the sentimental. A fatal miscalculation. Or so we all thought. Evelyn continued, her voice now sharp as a dagger. What I myself believed until a few days ago. But the truth, as my father used to say, is like good wine, it always comes to the surface. From a hidden pocket in her red dress, Evelyn pulled out an envelope which she opened with deliberate movements. The truth is that Julien Dubois does not exist. His real name is Antonio Santoro, an Italian con man investigated for fraud in his country before mysteriously disappearing in 2014. Julien took a step back, his face now completely transformed. The mask of perfection was crumbling by the moment, revealing the cold calculation that had always been underneath. Evelyn, this is ridiculous. He tried, his French accent suddenly less pronounced. I don't know what they've told you, but... The truth, she interrupted him, relentless, is that you didn't approach me by chance. You investigated me, you investigated my family, and you saw an opportunity, the heiress of a wine empire vulnerable after a tragedy. She pulled another document from the envelope. The truth is that my parents' Mercedes was sabotaged 3 days before their death. When the mechanic discovered the tampering and warned them, they had to use another vehicle that fateful night. Julien glanced quickly towards the exits, assessing his options. Captain Jimenez and his men tensed, ready to intervene. The truth, Evelyn's voice trembled for the first time, is that the SUV my parents used that night had also been tampered with. It was not an accident. It was a meticulously planned murder. A collective gasp swept through the cathedral. Some guests stood up, horrified. Father William instinctively crossed himself. And the final truth, the one that brings me here dressed in the color of the blood you spilled. Evelyn faced Julien directly, her eyes burning with contained fury. Is that you, Antonio Santoro, orchestrated the murder of my parents to seize everything they built? Julien abandoned all pretense. His face hardened, his eyes as cold as ice. You can't prove a thing, he hissed, in a low voice. You have nothing but theories, coincidences. Evelyn smiled for the first time, a smile that held no joy, only grim satisfaction. You're wrong. I have the testimony of the mechanic who discovered the sabotage of the Mercedes. I have the forensic results confirming the tampering of the SUV. I have documents proving your true identity and your connections to the middlemen you hired. With a signal of her hand, the side doors opened. Carlos Rodriguez entered, escorted by an officer, his face pale but determined. Behind him, 2 forensic experts held folders of evidence. Go ahead, Captain Jimenez, Evelyn said clearly. The police captain advanced down the center aisle, followed by his men. It was then that Julien Dubois, cornered and exposed, showed his true nature. With a violent movement, he tried to grab Evelyn, his eyes now stripped of any mask, revealing an animalistic fury. You ungrateful bitch, he spat, his accent now clearly Italian. I gave you everything. I saved you when you were a pathetic mess. The officers lunged at him, but before they could reach him, Thomas Bennett, with a surprising agility for his age, stepped between Evelyn and Julien. The impact sent him to the ground, but he achieved his goal to protect her one last time as he had promised Robert years ago. The officers subdued Julien, who struggled furiously as they handcuffed him. His incoherent shouts echoed in the cathedral as they dragged him towards the exit. Antonio Santoro, you are under arrest for the murders of Robert and Eleanor Sterling for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, Captain Jimenez announced formally. You have the right to remain silent. But Julien was no longer listening. All his composure, his cultivated elegance, his perfect control had vanished. What remained was the true essence of the man, a cornered predator roaring impotently as his carefully constructed empire of lies collapsed around him. Evelyn stood by the altar, her red dress like a living flame in the midst of the chaos. Her eyes followed Julien as he was taken out of the cathedral, not with hatred but with a strange mix of satisfied resolution and sadness for what could have been. When the doors closed behind them, an absolute silence fell over the congregation. 200 guests remained motionless, stunned by the drama they had just witnessed. Evelyn Cruz turned to them, her figure erect, her face serene despite the tears that now ran freely down her cheeks. "I apologize for making you all a part of this moment," she said in a clear voice. "But I needed witnesses. I needed everyone to see the truth. To know that Robert and Eleanor Sterling did not die in a simple accident, but because of the boundless ambition of a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted." She took a few steps into the center aisle, her red dress flowing around her like a fulfilled promise. "There will be no wedding today. But there is justice. And for me, that is far more important." With her head held high, Evelyn Sterling walked alone down the center aisle, through the murmurs and astonished gazes of the guests. The woman who had entered as a bride destined for sacrifice now left as a victorious warrior. Outside, officers were putting Julian into a patrol car. His shouts had ceased, replaced by a calculating silence. His eyes, when they met Evelyn's in the distance, no longer showed fury, but a cold promise. This was not over. But Evelyn Sterling was no longer afraid. She had faced her worst nightmare and had emerged victorious. The truth, like good wine, had finally come to the surface. What would happen now to the man who had tried to steal everything from her? Would legal justice achieve what poetic justice had already begun? The headline of the Napa Valley Chronicle took up the entire front page. "Vineyard Heiress exposes. Killer at the altar." The photograph showed Julien Dubois being escorted from the cathedral, his face contorted in a snarl flanked by 2 officers. In a smaller inset photo was Evelyn Sterling in her dramatic red dress, an image that would become a symbol of justice throughout the valley. 3 months had passed since the day Napa residents now simply called the Red Wedding. In the county courtroom packed to the last seat, Judge Phillips banged his gavel one last time. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, and considering the defendant's partial confession, this court finds Antonio Santoro, also known as Julien Dubois, guilty on all counts. 2 counts of first degree, murder, fraud, identity theft, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. The final gavel strike echoed in the room like a long-awaited peal of justice. In the front row, Evelyn Sterling received the news with serenity. Beside her, Thomas Bennett and Rachel Stein shared her contained relief. Antonio Santoro, stripped of the elegant facade of Julien Dubois, remained impassive, as he heard his sentence, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Only as the bailiffs approached to lead him away did he turn briefly towards Evelyn. His eyes, cold and calculating to the end, sent a silent message that she met without flinching. She no longer feared him. She owed him nothing. She was free. Spring had come to Napa Valley, blanketing the vineyards in a fresh green and wild flowers. On the terrace of the Sterling mansion, now restored to its original splendor, Evelyn personally supervised the early harvest. "The sugar levels are perfect this year," Thomas commented, checking recent samples. "It's going to be an exceptional harvest." Evelyn nodded, her gaze sweeping with satisfaction over the vineyard-covered hills her family had cultivated for generations. "My father always said that after a storm, the vines produce the best grapes," she replied with a gentle smile, as if the struggle makes them stronger, more resilient. Thomas watched her with paternal pride. Evelyn's transformation in these months had been extraordinary. The vulnerable, manipulated woman was gone completely. In her place was a confident, decisive leader who had taken the reins of Sterling Vineyards with a clear vision and an unshakable strength. Rachel joined them folder in hand as always, but now her expression was relaxed, almost cheerful. "Good news," she announced. "We have legally recovered the north parcel. The fraudulent transfer has been completely nullified. The land is officially the property of Sterling Vineyards again." Evelyn nodded with satisfaction. Piece by piece, she had reclaimed everything Antonio Santoro had tried to steal: the company, the properties, the contracts. Everything was returning to her legitimate control. But more important than the material possessions was what she had recovered within herself. Her confidence, her strength, her connection to her family heritage. She was no longer just the daughter of Robert and Eleanor Sterling. She was their true successor, the bearer of their vision and their determination. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said, watching the sunset over the vineyards. "I want to create a special wine, a limited edition in honor of my parents." "That's a beautiful idea," Thomas replied. "Do you have a name in mind?" Evelyn smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way it hadn't in years. "The truth," she said simply. "Because, as my father always said, it always comes to the surface, like good wine." Thomas and Rachel completed in unison, sparking knowing laughter among the 3. Gone. That night, alone in the study that had once belonged to her father, Evelyn contemplated a family photograph taken years ago. Her parents smiled beside her, all three standing in front of their first award-winning harvest. She gently traced the faces of Robert and Eleanor with her finger. "We did it," she whispered. "Justice." Finally. It hadn't been an easy road. The trial, the public exposure, reliving every painful detail of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. But every step had strengthened her, every revelation had freed her a little more. On her desk lay the latest issue of Times, Wine Spectator, **. The cover showed Evelyn Sterling among the vineyards, with the headline "Renaissance in Napa, How Evelyn Sterling Turned Tragedy into Triumph." The article detailed not only the dramatic denouement of the Red Wedding, but also the innovations she had since implemented at Sterling Vineyards, solidifying its place as an undisputed leader in the premium market. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Carlos Rodriguez, the mechanic whose testimony had been crucial in the case. "Miss Sterling, I just wanted to thank you," he said, his voice emotional. "The loan you gave me. I just signed the purchase agreement for my own shop right here in Napa." "It's the least I could do," Carlos Evelyn replied warmly. "Your courage made justice possible. My family will always be in your debt." Hanging up, a sense of peace washed over her. She had honored her parents' legacy not only by keeping the company they created alive, but also by practicing the values they instilled in her: integrity, determination, and gratitude. Evelyn Sterling had faced the worst of human nature and had emerged not just victorious but transformed. The tragedy that Antonio Santoro had planned as her destruction had, by a twist of fate, become her making. In the vineyards, the new harvest promised to be exceptional. The grapes, nurtured by the California sun and the expert hands of those who tended them, were slowly ripening, turning adversity into sweetness, struggle into character. Like their keeper, Evelyn had also matured through pain, becoming a woman her parents would have recognized with pride, strong, just, and unbreakable. The red dress, now a powerful symbol, hung framed on a discreet wall in the winery, not as a reminder of revenge, but as a testament to transformation from pain to power, from victim to vindicator, from heiress to leader in her own right. The story of Evelyn Sterling and her red wedding would become a legend in Napa Valley, told and retold for generations, a reminder to all that the truth, like good wine, always invariably comes to the surface. If this story moved, you don't forget to like it, share it with anyone you think needs to hear this message of strength, and subscribe so you don't miss our next stories. Comment what you would do in Evelyn's place, and don't miss our next video, which will appear on your screen in a few seconds. Your support makes these stories of overcoming adversity and finding justice possible.